Hello, everyone. In this second episode, we're going to go into a little bit more detail on understanding the way analysts are approaching what's happening in geopolitics, how it's not really a naked power grab, as they tend to say. It's not really what is the main causal factor of why the international world order is breaking down, what they say. And, and for us to understand as Christians what the right thing to look at is, so that we can be effective in our world and with the people around us.
The de-dollarization, which a lot of mainstream economists and financial analysts are saying is a myth, it's very much in play. 32 different countries, including some of our main allies, like the United Kingdom and the European Central Bank and Japan, have signed currency swap agreements with China. This has been part of China's playbook this whole time, is they like to do bilateral things because then they control each country individually. It prevents the other countries from uniting. And so all these countries, because China manufactures all these things, have created these bilateral swap lines with 32 different countries, many of which are our allies. The United States is not on that list.
We're seeing a convergence of this being not just simply a currency war, but a war of value, resource, and the viability not of a world order, but of key hegemon actors in their specific region.
In order for it to maintain its long-term viability, has to control the Western Hemisphere. It has to. Not if the United States does not, then the United States will fall into a major economic depression, stagnation, something horrendous that would cause untold millions of suffering and death. So, and you look at all these things, what has happened? Other countries stopped purchasing long-term U.S. debt since 2014, but the U.S. federal deficit continued. And if you look at what U.S. debt looks like now, it's shifted almost entirely to what's called the front end of the yield curve. That's in finance speak. For non-financial people, for layman's terms, that means it's short term. Like it's 30-day, 60-day, 90-day bonds, maybe up to 1 year. 1 year, you buy a bond and you get that bond back plus interest on whatever duration that it is, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, or a year. That's short term. Historically, what the U.S. actually, and for the viability of the U.S. expenditures, it needed to be long term. Because if it's long term, and if it's long term at a low interest rate, it means that the actual interest expense that the U.S. government has to pay doesn't really significantly increase year after year. If it's because it's the same, it's long term. So, and that actually started not under President Trump, it started under Janet Yellen. Now, here's the thing I do want to emphasize. I'm not saying all this to make this a thing about endorsing President Trump. I'm not trying to endorse President Trump and speak badly against the last Democrat president. That's not the point. The point is to recognize a lot of analysts, they're pinning the blame on Trump when the reality is the blame has much deeper causes, which both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have had to deal with. So in the physical supplies being that are necessary to equip the military being available, these have gradually been outsourced in huge quantities to China for manufacturing, and China has stated openly that they want the rules-based, or the LWO, basically, led by the USA, to end, and that they want to take the lead, come out of their century of humiliation. They believe it's their destiny to lead the world. So the suppliers of this material have to be willing to take U.S. dollars as payment. And that is eroding away, as you saw in the document that I sent you. That's from the People's Bank of China. The de-dollarization, which a lot of mainstream economists and financial analysts are saying is a myth, it's very much in play. That document shows, let's see, how many are there? There are, I'm looking at it right now, 32 different countries, including some of our main allies, like the United Kingdom and the European Central Bank and Japan, have signed currency swap agreements with China. What that does, what a currency swap agreement does, is it enables trade. These are bilateral, and bilateral meaning it's that country with China, not in some kind of cooperative SWIFT system. And this has been part of China's playbook this whole time, is they like to do bilateral things because then they control each country individually. It prevents the other countries from uniting. And so all these countries, because China manufactures all these things, have created these bilateral swap lines with 32 different countries, many of which are our allies. The United States is not on that list. And it enables them to buy Chinese goods, to store renminbi, or yuan, to store yuan in some kind of arrangement, and to settle the trade, in Chinese currency, but to net settle the trade in gold. That's the interesting thing, because a long time people were saying, "Oh, China can never be the world's reserve currency because they don't want to hold all these bonds." Well, China has decided a long time ago they don't want the world holding their bonds the way the world holds American bonds. They want for it to net settle in gold, and let gold be, because that benefits them. It benefits them for them to hold their reserves in gold, something that doesn't devalue over time. Okay, and so all these bilateral swap lines with China and all these countries, if they're making industrial products, they're making consumer goods, and they're taking renminbi as payment, it undercuts the dollar. With gold being a reserve asset, a store of value, not necessarily a currency. It enables it puts us in a position to where less and less people are going to need to take dollars. It's not that people are going to refuse to take dollars. It's that they're not going to need to take dollars because something else might be more valuable. Hey, if you have renminbi, you have gold, you can just swap the gold into yuan. You can buy your Chinese products that you like, and then whatever you didn't need to pay, you swap it back into gold. Why do you need the dollar for that? That's what's going on. That's the way the system is working. And the American middle class, the fourth point about people being willing to risk the lives of their sons and daughters in U.S. American adventures in foreign wars that are not part of our national interest, or they might be, but less a part of our national interest than what's going on in this hemisphere. The American middle class that elected Donald Trump, they're no longer willing to sacrifice their sons and daughters. That's why they elected Donald Trump. Is they're like, no, we don't want this. And right or wrong, of whether or not they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. That's the way they see it. Okay, so that's why when I look at this, and I'm like, okay, Fareed Zakaria is calling this a naked power grab, and he had some good points about the behavior of the United States. He still doesn't see what most analysts can't see. Okay, he is. Okay, just take a look at yourself. The U.S. Let's look at the alternate perspective of what they're not seeing. The alternate perspective is this: America found itself at the losing end of a game that it's playing with China. China wasn't playing by the same rules. Okay.
Right.
And there's an article in Foreign Affairs that just came out from the last week that was talking about that same thing, about how Donald Trump is potentially making the world a more dangerous place, and it's all about how he's destroying the LWO. And my point is not that he's not abiding by the LWO because the LWO doesn't function anymore. It doesn't work anymore. So there's no reason to abide by those rules, especially when our chief adversaries have not been playing by those same rules. And if going into Venezuela was a violation of those rules? Like, what are we supposed to do? Get a Security Council resolution to, to see, we want to send in a Delta Force team to kidnap Maduro? And uh, and there's so many denials that Venezuela has had. Venezuela has had a very significant hand in the narcotics trade. They may not be
Hmm.
producing the narcotics, but they are facilitating it. We've known this for years. I know part of the reason I know this is I know someone. I'm not going to say who, but I know someone who has interest in Mexico, has uh, knows in particular about a particular island on off the coast of the Yucatan where the Mexican government seized half of the island years ago from another owner, and in particular did it entirely for the reason of setting up a system where the narcotics trade could come in. These are corrupt Mexican officials that did this, could come in and have a place to stop and rest in their boats as they were taking their drugs from, they were trafficked from Colombia through Venezuela up into the United States. They'd stop there, get gasoline, get some rest, and visit with prostitutes or whatever, and then go on their way. So this is the kind of thing that's happening. So it is, and Donald Trump didn't take an oath of office to preserve the liberal world order. He took an
Right.
oath of office to defend the Constitution of the United States. All presidents take that oath of office. Biden took that oath of office as well. You can judge whether or not you thought he was doing it, and you can judge whether or not you thought whether you think Trump is doing it. But he's elected by Americans for America. That's what George Friedman says, and I would refer people to George Friedman in that also, another analyst that I think has had a good understanding of this. So,
So, so what we're
go ahead.
what we're seeing is, and correct me if I'm wrong. Number one, the shattering of the international liberal order, and we've known that that's actually been an ongoing train wreck for a while because of what we're seeing at the macro political stage of the global chessboard, especially with Russia and China. Uh, and also Europe itself is in the throes right now of some really important, um, almost like an important crossroad as to what direction Europe is going to take, uh, primarily based because of what's happened with immigration. But behind all of that, and this has been ongoing, I believe, for quite a while, in fact, going back to Saddam Hussein and the Oil for Food program with the United Nations and all of that was premised or kind of contextually couched in a shift away from US dollars. It was a move away. In fact, the European Union, when it came out with its euro, all of a sudden offered up, even to OPEC, it was like, oh, a new opportunity to shift out of the US dollar. And ever since then, it's been like an escalating reality. And I think at this point, with what you've just described, is we're seeing a convergence of this being not just simply a currency war, but a war of value, resource value, and the viability not of a world order, but of key hegemon actors in their specific regions. And so you see America acting from Venezuela all the way up to Greenland. You see Russia now trying to exert its position and has been since 2014 into Ukraine and then potentially into other parts of Eastern Europe, what used to be in its sphere of influence. China, of course, Southeast Asia, being, China is the elephant in the room in terms of that region of the world. We're seeing a sense of regionalism that's occurring, like almost the new world order is a regional world order of sorts, with at the center of this is whose value system, economic value system, will be the operating principle. It reminds me of, I think it was in June of 2024, Trump was on a podcast and saying to the effect of regarding the undermining of the dollar currency system at the international level, that this is losing that is likening to losing a war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he did say that. I remember that. And it kind of goes whether or not Trump really understands all all the intricate pieces that are being pulled together in this chessboard. At least one thing that I would question that there are people in I think in his cabinet cabinet policymakers that do understand what's going on there. The thing that has to happen, like the United States government and the Federal Reserve, which is the U.S. Central Bank, they cannot save both the currency and the Treasury market.
Wow.
They can't save them both. And that's what they're trying to do. That's what Scott Besson is trying to do. He's hoping and believing that at some level he's going to be able to preserve the value of the dollar, and the tariff thing they thought was going to work, and it hasn't. And they didn't have. China is the country that has escalation dominance in this whole thing, and they have the means to escalate, and they pushed back hard against Trump, and Trump had to back off because in order to try and save both the currency and the dollar, they need to try and force the entire world into using the dollar. And of course, the entire rest of the world gets a vote in that of whether or not they want to use the dollar. And when it comes down to it and they realize, we don't think we want to use the US dollar. We want to use something else if you're going to try and set all the rules. So then what ultimately then what happens is the debt becomes unsustainable. They can't sell enough long-term treasuries. People don't want to buy enough, so they push everything to short-term treasuries. And they're hoping and waiting and hoping and waiting that something's going to happen. They try to push everything into stable coins, see if they could create demand for stable coins that would then be backed by U.S. treasuries. That's a bid to save both the dollar and the treasury market. And it's not working. So the demand for stablecoins has collapsed. One of the biggest stablecoin companies, Tether, has bought massive reserves of gold, which is fascinating just in and of itself. They're backing up the value of their stablecoin with gold, less than with U.S. Treasury bonds. So with all these things, there's an interesting thing, and let's just one thing about silver. I'll just touch on silver a little bit. Silver going up to $92 per troy ounce. I saw a tweet, Luke Groman commented on it, that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange decided to open up a whole new set of futures contracts in silver to meet the growing demand for physical silver in 100 troy ounce bars. And Roy Groman tweeted, he said, "Yeah, I can't wait until those paper silver contracts come out, because I'm going to go up to my solar panels and I'm going to pull all the physical silver out of my solar panels and I'm going to replace it with these paper contracts." Yeah. And of course, obviously, it's so obviously the whole idea is that you need the actual physical materials. The contracts, the derivative contracts, the papers don't work when and China and Russia realized that a long time ago, and they have been. That's why Russia's economy never collapsed like they said it was, because they have been focused on having the physical resources. Okay, I thought about it like this too. The whole idea, like having swap lines. Say we have swap lines in Argentina or some other countries in South America in order to help finance the production of rare earths that are in the ground down there. The swap lines themselves do not get the materials to the United States tomorrow. If I'm a government, a Tomahawk missile costs about $2 million. If I'm the government and I have a briefcase with $2 million in cash, and I walk over to Raytheon and I say, I'm here to buy my Tomahawk missile, and I plop down the briefcase with $2 million in cash, I've got a truck outside, they're not going to say, okay, we'll load it up. You don't convert $2 million directly into a Tomahawk missile. That thing takes time. It has to be put on contract, it has to be ordered, it takes time to build it, and you have to have the materials to build it.
Right.
Yeah, and so that's where we've become so financialized into thinking that the money is, that's where, it's an idol, right? An idol will ultimately disappoint. When money is...
And I appreciate how you just said that. We've become so financialized. Because there's a difference. That's the difference right there, George. We've become financialized. and therefore we are resting on the very top of a house of cards, with the bottom layer being the resources. And the resources don't care if the contracts exist or not. If the resources aren't going to flow, your
That's
financial
right.
system doesn't work. You can't buy, you can't build your Tomahawk missile.
That's right.
It needs some silver. you
That's right.
can't build your you can't build your AI data centers. It needs resources,
And that's
as
why
much as
China
energy.
said, yeah, and
Yeah.
China said they're not going to sell any rare earths to any company that is going to use in manufacturing American defense equipment. And they
Yep.
control the rare earths market. There's only like 10% of rare earths are processed outside of China. So
Yep.
that means, and if the Trump administration talked about going to warp speed in this, well, okay, what does warp speed mean? Well, you got to have welders, right? Okay, you don't just go grab someone off the street, put them in a class for a couple days, and expect that they're going to be able to put high quality welds into building submarines where people's lives are going to depend on it. They go, 500 feet down under the water or however far they go. You know, these it takes welders have to be trained and it takes years to, especially for the high quality people, to get that good. You have you know and China has been doing all that, and while America has been thinking that because there's never going to be any more war because we reached the end of history. Thank you, Francis Fukuyama, that and other people that believed in him, not just him. I'm not trying to pick on him,
Right.
but
Yep.
um, that this idealized view that there's not going to be any war. China has been playing this game the entire time with the intent of coming out on top. They never even once had it in their mind that they were going to play with the intent to win alongside everybody else. And because they still had this idea as the century of humiliation, and this whole idea. You look at it from their perspective, the idea that everybody should win, instill in their minds, is a Western idea, and is the Western powers that colonized and humiliated China in the first place. So they it might be more virtuous that the West has come out of a colonization mentality, but the people that were previously colonized, they don't really care. You know, they're still
Yeah.
mad at the colonial history. So, um,
Okay.
okay,
So
so
can I quickly say something here, George?
yeah,
This is
yeah,
fascinating because, okay, um, as a Canadian in the 1980s, 1990s, and into the 2000s, and still today, unfortunately, we were kind of groomed to think of ourselves as moving away from the commodity sector, and we were going to be a service industry. We were going to be a service economy. Whereas Canada, we've got the best commodities. I mean, we've got unbelievable commodities. We are resource rich. We have always been the hewers of wood and the drawers of water. That's kind of how the resource commodity sector has viewed itself. And then that became kind of a dirty word, a dirty way of thinking. We're going to be green, we're going to be clean, and we are going to become a service industry. I saw something interesting in the US when we moved down to Indiana, and I had no idea that this thinking really existed until I moved to America and really spent time with the American people. Great people. Love Americans, love Canadians. I mean, people are people. We all have hopes, dreams, and aspirations. We all have challenges and issues. One of the things, though, that struck me, George, was that the emphasis on education, the emphasis on young people, was not in the commodity sector. It was not in the trade sector. It was primarily in the white collar, you want to become a CEO, you want to go get your master's degree, and you don't want to get your hands dirty. We don't want
mm-hmm,
welders. We don't want plumbers. We don't want mines, that type of thing. And it wasn't that it was a national conversation saying we don't want. It was more like, as parents, we didn't want our children to do that. We wanted them to go to university, get an advanced degree, and immediately walk up the corporate ladder.
yeah,
That was the sense I was getting already in the early 2000s. And I'm like, now looking back and going, well, this is part of our demise in my country, no longer viewing the resources we have as being truly valuable. And in America, looking at probably the most important resource that you have, your people, and going, oh, focus on finance, not physical development with resources. And what you've just described to me is China, and I believe to a point Russia is going, yeah, well, the real world operates off of resources.
That's right. That's right. And we failed to recognize that. And like Peter Turchin wrote about in his book, in the 1980s, at the deregulation, and there's good and bad about the deregulation, but at some level, it jump-started a system that said the people that control the money are more important, and so they deserve to get paid more. And that's where I think, I mean, Americans aren't stupid when they look at what's going on and they're like, those people are the ones that are getting paid. If you go and become a welder, you become, or even an engineer. Where I worked as an engineer, there's always a cap to. I had I had so much more knowledge just working at the refinery that I worked at. Just after a year, I had so much more understanding of the way that that plant operated than some of the people, not all, but some of the people in the management. Yet they were always going to get much higher salary than I ever could get as an engineer. And I even looked at the corporate pay structure. It just wasn't. Now, not that I need that, but the thing is, when that high salary is what's necessary in order to live, because the cost of living is going up and up and up, and your salary is not going up at that same level, and people are gonna they're gonna be like, well, I'm gonna go get that other job because that's the one that's making enough money for me to actually live. And then, oh, and now we get all these cheap goods manufactured by all these other countries, and it makes it fun. As long as I have money, it makes my life fun. I got money, I can go. We set up a system that's non-virtuous and exalts, uh, you know, just that one area of discipline, and doesn't. While China has had these engineers that have risen through the ranks, and they really really thrive in that. Now we have engineers as well, but it's too much in the tech industry. People where I came from couldn't understand why I would go work as an electrical engineer at a in a refinery that was in a that processed ore from a mine. It was kind of, it didn't make sense. Okay, but anyway, just let me just move on here. Okay, when I go through all the things that they are missing, what the analysts are missing, they're missing the fact that the rules-based order ceased to function when Russia invaded Ukraine. That's the first thing they're missing, and they're in denial. And these essays that they're writing are part of the grief and denial stage, and now they're looking for someone to blame, and they're blaming it on Trump when everything was in place for it, or it actually stopped functioning before him. All the efforts by the Western powers to stop Russia had failed. Russia's economy didn't collapse. Okay,
Right.
The principles by which America led the rules-based order. This is important. The principles by which America led the rules-based order have to have both material and financial backing. It's not just the principles. Okay. Principles are great. We all believe in principles. We all have a moral. Most of us have a moral compass, but the principles themselves, if the material and financial backing isn't there, and hasn't been there for several years, it's impossible for America to continue to lead the international liberal world order. It doesn't, because it doesn't exist, and that order it stopped really existing in 2022. So, okay, what else did I want to say on this? America's strength depended on its economic strength, and the principles bought friends, but only if they recognized that America could back up what they said with economic strength. And since that collapsed, the friends stopped looking to America. I mean, most countries are getting all their goods from China now anyway. And think about this. the global South countries, they didn't join in with the condemnation of Russia and the sanctions on Russia and all those things
Right.
after Russia invaded Ukraine. They didn't join. Okay?
That's right.
And it's not that they thought it was good. They weren't endorsing Russia. They're like, that's Russia's war against Ukraine. Why does that have to do with us? And why is America and Europe trying to force us to get involved in that war? That war doesn't have anything to do with us. That's kind of what the way they were thinking. Okay. So now we get to Venezuela. This is where it comes into Venezuela. What the administration has been looking at is China has slowly been eroding America's influence in southern Africa. Russia has very much pushed America's influence and France's influence out of Central and Northern Africa. China is pushing hard against American influence in Southeast Asia. All of Southeast Asian countries have China as their largest trading partner. Several of them still look to America for defense, but a bunch of them have started turning back away from them. Cambodia being one in particular that has kind of embraced China. They say that the king of Thailand, or maybe not the king of Thailand, the head of state of Thailand has been more favorable toward China. There's just a lot of pushback, and one of the major political factions in the Philippines is very much pro-China, the Duterte faction. They're not in power right now. It's very likely that they will go back into power at the next election of the Philippine president, which will be in 2028. And the Philippines will pivot to China at that point. That is a very real possibility. So Trump administration is looking at all these things and they're saying, we've lost resource mines in Africa. China is pushing to garner all this influence in South America. And South America is providing drugs. And then there's Cuba. Cuba, which has the potential to blockade 40% of exports into and out of the United States through the Gulf of Mexico. And they last year signed a military agreement with Russia. They're providing the support for Nicolas Maduro, and Cuba is a big problem. And Russia is potentially there, and there's policymakers looking back in the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis and the danger that Cuba actually presents to the United States, where it's sort of like it's this whole, we got to nip this one in the bud. You got to before it. If Russia put Oreshnovik missiles that fly at hypersonic speeds in Cuba that could potentially target American cities, and they say that we don't have any defense against those things, how are we going to get out of that? So this naked power, and so what are we supposed to do? Go get the UN Security Council's permission to kidnap Maduro? The idea is completely absurd. And if the liberal world order were still functioning, then indicated by that Russia would not have been successful in their invasion of Ukraine, then it might be reasonable to demand that President Trump abide by UN Security Council resolutions and do it that manner. But they're not playing. Those other countries have not been playing by the same game. And so for our long-term viability and survival, we can't play it by those same rules either. And in the Caribbean, in order to control Cuba, we have to control Venezuela. You cannot control one without the other. And so bringing all those countries, bringing all of our military and putting a large naval presence in that area, that's what they had to do. They saw that they had to do it, and that's what was necessary. That's why they did it. Okay. And when we go and look at how all that does, and it does so many things that help America's national interest. Iran was starting to use Cuba and Venezuela to export some of their drone technology to put there. And that's been stopped. Hezbollah, had operatives there that have now come out. People were saying, it was all conspiracy, and now it's come out that it was actually happening. China's cut off from Venezuela, Russia's cut off from Venezuela, and there's nothing that any of them can do. Now, is it possible that Trump, in order to do this, basically told China, we're going to let you take Taiwan at some point? Just don't do it militarily, or make it slow or something. It is possible, but why would he make that choice? And I don't think that it's okay for. I mean, Taiwan is definitely a core. Also, they manufacture all of these chips, so they're a core part of America's national interest. But if China controls, most of the, if Chinese material is necessary for controlling most of America's military, and they say, when we shot all our missiles in the 12-day war versus Iran, we depleted like 70% of our anti-aircraft arsenal that we had over there, and they're saying it's going to take 7 or 8 years to replenish those missiles. I mean, we don't have the manufacturing ability. Basically, China says, hey, we say, we want you to give us rare earths. And China is like, what are you going to use the rare earths for? We're going to use them to rebuild the missiles that we used against Iran. And then we're going to point those missiles at you. China's like, oh, okay, well, we're not going to sell you those rare earths. That's the situation that we're in. So that's the situation that that policy mistakes and policy missteps have done. Now, where does this come in? As far as regionalism goes, it does set up the entire world so that we are moving to a regional system. And the United States, in order for it to maintain its long-term viability, has to control the Western Hemisphere. It has to. Not if the United States does not, then the United States will fall into a major economic depression, stagnation, something horrendous that would cause untold millions of suffering and death. They say that every 1% drop in GDP, in American GDP, 40,000 people die because of that. I mean,
Wow.
it's not. This is not just about money and numbers. This is about people's lives, and it's about the lives of the people that live in the United States, and in Canada, and in the entire Western Hemisphere. Okay, so
Okay.
yeah,
What I'm finding fascinating with this conversation, with your analysis of this, is that in a sense, what we're seeing is a reversal of the situation that occurred 35 years ago with the ending of the Cold War. We made the assumption that the Cold War, and you're right, the concept of the peace dividend, hey, the war is done, the conflict is done, it's the end of history. That was our thinking. And yet, at the same time, that was not the thinking of China. That was not the thinking of Russia. There was still a continuation, though of course it shifts and changes because of technological changes, because of changes over the course of 35 years. There's all kinds of changes. But the fundamental nature of it remained that we are still, as the Chinese economy, the Chinese system, the Russian system, there's still um, a trajectory that says we have to rebuild. We have lost our empire, and now we have to gain it back again. And America, in essence, kind of fell asleep to that because we had this perspective in the West that we won, when the reality of it is it's way more complex than winning
yeah,
or losing.
yeah, that's exactly right. That is 100% right.
Wow.
Yeah,
Big history.
yeah. And I think for us, just kind of to end it on this thing, why is this important for us as Christians to understand? Because our audience, our primary audience are people in the church. If you're
Right.
watching this, it's because primarily you would be someone who's in the church who wants to understand these things. God wants us to have understanding. He wants, and at some level, having this understanding of what's going on internationally enables us to make informed decisions about how it's going to affect us, about our culture, about our community, about policy changes, and it helps us to recognize we don't have to just believe what the established people that are that are the ones that are given voices by the the dominant media. We don't have to just accept blindly what they say is true. And we
Yeah.
need, if we are going to say, okay, look, we're not trying to argue that Donald Trump is doing a good job.
Right.
That's
It's
not,
not about
we're not trying to argue for or against him. Our point is not to, what we're trying to say is, let's look at this accurately. And the accurate way to look at this is to first recognize that this international liberal world order stopped functioning in 2022. And so, whatever the United States does, no matter who is in charge of it, must be based on what is good for the United States. And if the United States chooses to try and resurrect something that's dead, that isn't functioning anymore, and is willing to sacrifice American citizens' lives in order to accomplish it, then it's going to fail. And I don't think that either party would do that, because once they get in office and they see what's necessary for people to be able to live, they change policies to make things more palatable.
right. Right, and I think another aspect of this, and this is an important part too, is that then for us as believers, when we see all of this happening, when we see this unfolding, we can at least not just simply understand the times that we're in, understand how this would even maybe impact missions, how it impacts churches, how it impacts even our giving in our churches, because also we're wrestling with our own personal economies being impacted by it. But then how do we safeguard ourselves? How do we put measures in place to try to financially safeguard ourselves? Because we don't know how this is all going to shake out yet. This can go a couple of different directions. You're right. America is going to look at protecting its own interests that way. China's doing the same thing. Russia's doing the same thing. So, yeah, we don't know how it's going to play out, but it's going to still, at an individual level, it still should compel us to then consider what steps can we take, if any, and I think we can, to be able to at least, if it's not just simply about understanding, but then using some practical measures with that understanding, how do we position ourselves?
Yes, that's right.
Without being, we can't even say this regarding, this is not financial advice, but hey, maybe a good idea is to try to, curb your debt levels, because debt is...
For sure. I think also another thing, the understanding has a virtuous quality in and of itself, especially in dealing with young people, because young people are going to, the ones that are in school at high school and college level, are going to gravitate toward the people that they're looking at the world around them. They're seeing that things are in terrible shape, and they're going to gravitate to people that are able to communicate effectively on things that make sense. So that's important too. If fathers and mothers, people that are homeschooling, or people in churches and youth leaders are able to, when a young person is seeing what's going on in the world and feeling scared, are able to articulate how these things are important, that's going to give the young person comfort. Otherwise, what might they do? They might pursue understanding by someone that's a shaman, or someone in the other area, in an area that's not a Christian, that's not coming at it from a Christian base, and that can draw them away. So our understanding also affects the next generation.
Absolutely. No, this is good. Good conversation, George. This is awesome.
Yep. Okay, well, it's really good to talk. I know that you've got to be getting on to your next order of business for the evening. So I'll go on and stop it here, and we'll say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Okay.
All right.
Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this discussion on geopolitics, and that it's useful for you, and that it'll help you to understand the things that are happening, so that you can be effective in your discussions with people in your world, in your family, and at your church. And so we look forward to seeing you next time. If you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next podcast for the Orbis Century Report.